Hey guys, how's it going? I want to take you back to the 6th of June 2022 when I first came to have a look at this allotment. It was in a pretty bad way, as you can see. It was completely overgrown. It hadn't really had anything done to it for a year that I know of, possibly longer. A couple of brassica cages was the only sign it was actually growing anything. A dead rotavator in the middle of the path, a few fruit trees at the back. This is the first walk onto the site with my little phone camera. Hopefully in this video I'm going to show you how I tackle this plot, and I'm going to give you ideas as to alternatives to what I've done which will achieve the same result. There's a big patch of docks at the front here. There'd actually been a pile of compost dumped there 2 years before, and the docks had grown up and had 2 years to put root down. There was thistles, there was plantains, there was grass growing through the plantains, there was mare's tail, there was just an underscore and an overscore of weeds of every description. There was all this grass going to seed, there was all the docks going to seed, thistles going to seed. Terrible. It was terrible. This is what I call marsh grass. I'm not actually sure of the name. It grows about 4 or 5 foot tall. The root system is horrendous, really big, thick, long roots, and that grass can push through virtually anything. This is the right hand side of the allotment where the grass is barely growing. The soil is so bad, and the brambles are getting in from the field there. Again, brambles and interwoven amongst everything. The dead rotavator. That would be the worst thing you could use a rotavator on this site. What you would do is chop all that weed root up and just bring back more weeds. So never rotivate a site like this, guys. It's the worst thing you can do. This was the back of the plot really. There was a lot of fruit bushes in there, then the kind of storage area and the shed with a load of Himalayan balsam growing through everywhere. Himalayan balsam seed right throughout this wood chip as well. It's been coming up a couple of years in this area. So looking down the site now, yeah, it's a challenge, but I was really looking forward to doing it actually. You know, it's just me. I just love getting my teeth into something because from the first moment I walked onto this site, I knew exactly how I wanted it to look, how I was going to set it out, and I've pretty much done that. The first plan I had is the plan I put through, and as you see it today is how I first imagined it when I walked on. So it took quite a while actually getting rid of all the rubbish that was buried under all this stuff like bricks and wood and bottles and plant pots and netting and everything. First job was to clear them docks, the docks off the entire site, so I cut them down with secateurs and dumped them in a barrel. Get rid of all that seed first off, and my plan now is to trim the entire site twice, maybe 3 times in some places, to virtually scalp this whole site down to the soil surface and get rid of as much of this as I can, because I'm not digging anything on this ground. I am going to dig off about 2 inches where the paths are going, so I'm just going to cut it with the spade, chuck it on the mypet, get all the weed out of it, the roots out of it, put that back on the beds, and that means I can get about another 2 inches of wood chip in these paths to keep this weed down and stop it coming back up. So I've got all that done, give it a really good scalping, and I've started scraping it into piles, and just up to those 2 piles. I'm going to get all that raked up and then transfer it over there, make a big mound there because that's going to get composted. I managed to get some sheeting there. Got some down here as well, so that sheeting, I've put that down there for now. I'm going to start sheeting up here, covering this weed up. I wanted to get a lot of this trimmed down grass up because it just gives something less for these slugs to be attracted to. So if that's rotting underneath, it'll just encourage loads of slugs to come in and lay eggs and etc. Get that off as much as I can, and get it all in the hot bin. Pretty much trimmed right to the end. The border there, which has got a border boarding, I'm going to hand weed that because I like a lot of them plants and foxgloves and things. I love them. They look fantastic. It's better than looking at a tin sheet, isn't it? So they're staying, and I'm going to transplant these that are growing randomly in the middle. I'm going to transplant them into there as well. The one thing that's annoying me, which doesn't really matter, is this path, all this grass growing over it. So before I do much more, I'm going to clear the sides of this path and get all this grass off it. It's just me, it just annoys me. This here looks like it's had potatoes in with the furrows at some point. So the furrows and ridges have just been left. They kind of want levelling off, but all this stuff wants raking off beforehand. Foxglove there to move. Trimmed up to the boards here. Left the loopings in between these trees. I'm going to get these trees pruned as well. These apple trees. Get the secateurs out. Get them clipped. I have clipped that one, as you can see. Coming through here. Yeah, this is a bit more messy. I'd kind of run out of strimmer string when I got to here, so it's not been scalped as low. But it's got it down, which is a good thing. It does need hand weeding around these kind of blackcurrant bushes and these gooseberry bushes. Foxglove there to move, and that big plant or whatever it is, I'm going to put a sheet down there and just push that over, get rid of that. Don't want it there, and get all the soil out. Maybe fill in those furrows over there with it, where the potatoes were. There's 3 paths here, so you've got here kind of one there. I don't know what that is. It's about 2 inches deep. Big slab of concrete. Runs all the way to there, so it's about 12 foot long. I think that's just been dumped there. There's a row of bricks here that are forming a border against the border. So that's coming out, because that will be a path, and the first bed, growing bed, will actually be here. So it's about a week later, and I'd completely strimmed the whole allotment twice at this point, and you can see that the docks have actually started to come back through again, which I knew they'd do. Things like docks and nettles and mare's tail are very persistent. I'd also built the first hot bin there, and I'd been loading and loading all this grass that I'd raked up into that hot bin. Now that mypeck on the right there became the soil reclamation area for this whole side of the allotment. So as I was digging paths off, I was tipping all the soil onto that and reclaiming it, taking all the rubbish out, the roots, the weeds, the bits of glass, the bricks, everything. So I'd actually started making the beds here. So it was, you know, path, bed, path, bed, path, bed. I'd actually dug a little bit of soil off this area because it was rising up to this fence, and put it back onto the bed. That first bed was mostly just reclaimed soil and compost that was lying around the allotments in tubs and barrels and everything. So the mission is, guys, to get up to them trees behind the ornamental rotavator that's still a sort of semi-permanent structure on the allotment, to get up to that side, making paths and beds all the way down. And it was at some point I knew I was going to have to get some compost to put on these beds, so I was really busy locally trying to find some. Okay, it was a few days later, and I managed to source this beautiful 3-year-old rotted horse manure that was been laying in the field for 3 years. And I would encourage you to go around all the farms, all the stables, anywhere in your area, and just try and find some of this stuff, because it is absolutely magical. If you're doing no dig, or even if you've got an allotment and you want to grow food, go and find some of this stuff, and then you can start making your beds. And I was putting this on about 3 or 4 inches thick, so one trailer was making 3 or 4 beds. I'm just preparing to make the next 2 beds. I've marked out my 4 foot and my 2 foot for the path, and I've put the weed control matting down under the path. I'm also putting cardboard on top of the paths. The cardboard's well overlapped between that and the bed, so that if any weed does come up on the edges underneath that weed control stuff, it can't kind of creep round and start growing into the bed. Well, that's my hope anyway. It's really dry again, it's hot, so I've had the watering can out. I'm just going to go over it again with the watering can, just soak this cardboard down so it's not flying up when I'm tipping all the stuff on it. So this is actually bed 3 from the left, and this is more of that reclaimed soil that I was digging up from under the paths. And as I said, this soil was handy because it was heavier than the compost, and it just allowed me to rake it out to be 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick, just over the cardboard. It then dumped the compost on top of that, and I know this soil will have had weed seed in it, I knew that for sure, but I was putting 3 inches of good rotted compost on top, which, you know, is going to have weed seed in. And it's quite important there that if you make any holes in the cardboard, just put a patch on like that. And what you've got to remember here, that under that cardboard directly in the bed is just that allotment soil that has just been trimmed. So underneath that are still all the roots of those perennial weeds and the stems that are just wanting to get up. But this cardboard and this little bit of weightier soil and the compost, they just totally exclude light. So it's only actually the real toughest of perennial weeds that will be able to push through this. But as I found on this site, they were really easy to manage. Vast majority of the weed did not come back. It was purely things like mare's tail that just kept poking through here and there. A few other little random weeds here and there just kept poking through, but it was, you know, it wasn't until probably a month before that started happening. And all I would do, I would get my knife and I would just delve deep into the soil and cut the root as low as I could, and then just pull a bit of the plant out that was just poking through the surface. And I only had to do that maybe 2 times, even on the mare's tail, to prevent the mare's tail from coming back. So that was it, the first layer, as I say, maybe just about 1 inch deep, maybe just a fraction over. And there I'm just raking off that bit of grass root and just the little bits and bobs that were left in the soil after shaking all the sod off. So it's just a matter of leveling that out, and then I can start putting the compost down that had just come out of the trailer. Just pause here for a second, guys, and say, if you're taking on an allotment, just have a plan. I knew what my plan was. My plan was to prepare the allotment this year, in the 6 months I had up to December, for growing the year after. Now, if I hadn't had this compost to put on this ground, what I absolutely would have done, I would have heavily sowed these beds with mustard just on this 1 inch of topsoil that I'd reclaimed from the paths. You imagine if taking 2 inches depth of soil from these paths and spreading it onto a 4-foot bed, that means you will get 1 inch of soil across that bed. Fantastic depth and soil medium for putting mustard in. A real heavy load of mustard onto this soil. Mustard's actually allelopathic, so it puts out chemicals in its roots to try and prevent other plants from growing around it, basically. So it's a good weed suppressant in that respect, and it grows so thick and so fast. That's what I would have done, guys, without the compost. And on with the compost. And there we go, there was 5 barrows went into that bed. I mean, really, I didn't have to put this much down. Possibly 2 inches would have been more than adequate to go on top, but I just wanted to get as much fertility in the soil as I can. And the place where I was getting this from, there was probably approximately maybe 20 or 30 ton of this stuff lying in this field. As I say, it'd been there 3 years. So I had a good source of compost. And then it was on with the wood chip. Now this wood chip was really lumpy stuff. I just didn't have time or the inclination at this point to get a sieve out and sieve all these big lumps out, and I just decided that it's something I would do when I eventually came to take up the mypec from underneath these paths, which I've actually just done this year. And the reason I wanted the mypec out from under the paths was because I want this wood chip in direct contact with the soil so that it rots down, it breaks down, the worms can move through it, they can take the nutrients down, bring them up, and it will fertilise the sides of these beds. But after 12 months, or was it 18 months probably, the actual mypec under the paths had done an amazing job, and when I took it up this year, there was absolutely nothing underneath it. There was no root, there was no weed showing. So I simply pulled it all out, sieved it, got all the big lumps out and put it back down. The wood chip, incidentally, on these paths was about 4 or 5 inches deep, and that board that you can see there, which is against that border, I fully intended to take that board out, but at the moment that little border there is completely full of couch grass, of bindweed, of all kinds of really bad grasses, and I'm okay on this side because I've got the mypec down, I've got the wood chip on top, but I'm going to have to get into that border and hand weed it, so I'm going to have to try and pull as much of that root out as I can. And once I've done that, I did take them boards out because I don't like wooden boards on allotments. I don't like wooden beds because they just harbour slugs. It's great places for slugs to crawl down. They love resting against the sides of boards. They'll lay all their eggs there. As the wood starts to decay, the wood lice will move in, so you'll have thousands of wood lice, hundreds of slugs. You'll get earwigs going in there, you'll get red ants going in there. It just really are great homes for pests. Another quick pause, guys. You can see a few potato plants growing there. I'd actually sneaked them out of a bucket at home and stuck them in this bed and actually got a few nice potatoes off them. But this is more about why I've put this mypec on top of this composted bed, and it was again about the plot management to stop the weed seed that I knew would be in this compost. It's a cold compost heap off a field. It's going to be full of weed seed. It's been there for 3 years, so I didn't want that weed growing and having to weed it, so I put the mypec on to keep the weed down. Also keeps that compost dark so that underneath it keeps it moist, so the worms can get up from the soil or breed in that compost. A nice dark place for them to live, nice and moist, so I can let the microbiome build in that soil, let the worms get through it, stop the weed seeds growing, and leave that on until the next year when I come to start planting in them. Every time I made a bed, I'd cut a 4 or 5 foot strip off, and then I would cover the previous bed I'd just made. So this now just got regimental. You can see here I've actually got 4 beds made, and the path after that one ready for the next bed. Well, if you're still here, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll be back where we wrap this up.